Chapter 1. I'm tired of restarting my life. There is a type of tiredness sleep cannot fix. Not coffee. Not motivation videos. Not therapy quotes reposted by people who have never stared at a ceiling at 3 a.m. wondering why staying alive feels like unpaid overtime. The kind of tiredness where your soul feels bruised from existing too long inside disappointment. And the scary part is nobody notices it at first. Because you still laugh sometimes. You still answer messages occasionally. You still show up to work. You still say, I'm okay with Olympic-level acting skills while internally feeling like a building that survived a fire but should honestly be condemned. People think functioning means healing. But sometimes functioning is just panic wearing deodorant. You wake up already exhausted. Not physically. Spiritually exhausted. Like your mind spent the entire night fighting demons while your body pretended to sleep. You open your eyes and the first emotion isn't gratitude. It's disappointment. Another day. Another performance. Another 24 hours of pretending your brain is not quietly trying to kill you. And then comes the restart. Again. You tell yourself this time will be different. This time you'll fix your sleep schedule. This time you'll stop self-destructing. This time you'll control your anger, your addiction, your sadness, your impulses, your overthinking. This time you'll become the version of yourself everyone begged you to become years ago. But depression is evil in a very specific way. It lets you believe recovery is finally happening right before dragging you back into the same darkness you thought you escaped. Like a horror movie monster that never actually dies. One good week becomes one bad night. One bad night becomes one bad decision. One bad decision becomes another collapse. And suddenly you're back at the beginning again, wondering how your life turned into a human loading screen. That's the part nobody understands. The restarting. People celebrate success stories because they only see the ending. They do not see the humiliating number of times someone had to rebuild themselves from emotional ashes. They do not see the mornings where brushing your teeth felt like climbing Mount Everest emotionally. They do not see the shame of promising yourself change 50 times and still becoming the same broken person by Friday night. Eventually, something inside you begins to rot. Hope exhaustion. Not sadness. Not pain. Exhaustion. The kind that whispers, what's the point of trying if I always end up back here? And once your mind starts asking that question repeatedly, life becomes dangerous. Because hopelessness changes how reality feels. Food tastes dull. Music stops reaching you. Conversations feel fake. Time moves strangely. Days blur together like unfinished thoughts. And suddenly surviving stops feeling noble. It starts feeling pointless. That is the moment people misunderstand the most. Because when someone starts thinking about death, people assume they want destruction. But many times what they actually want is relief. Silence. Rest. An exit from the constant emotional noise inside their own head. They are not chasing death itself. They are trying to escape psychological suffocation. There's a reason emotionally broken people fantasize about disappearing. Not attention. Not manipulation. Exhaustion. Imagine carrying invisible weight every second of every day while the world keeps telling you to just stay positive. Imagine drowning while people outside the water critique your swimming technique. Imagine fighting your own mind every morning before most people even finish breakfast. That kind of existence changes people slowly, quietly, like rust spreading under paint. And then guilt enters the story, because now you hate yourself for being tired. You look at people surviving worse situations and feel weak for struggling. You start calling yourself lazy, broken, pathetic, dramatic. Meanwhile, your nervous system is operating like a war zone 24 hours a day. Even resting feels stressful because your thoughts never shut up long enough for peace to exist properly. The worst part? You begin mourning versions of yourself that no longer exist. The younger you that still had dreams. The version of you that laughed naturally. The version that believed life would eventually make sense. Depression does not always kill people physically first. Sometimes it kills identities long before bodies. You start forgetting who you were before survival became your full-time personality. And nobody talks enough about how humiliating it feels to keep falling apart in front of your own expectations. You become scared of hope itself, because hope creates disappointment. And disappointment hurts worse every single time it repeats. So eventually your brain develops a terrifying defense mechanism, expecting failure before life even begins. Self-sabotage starts feeling safer than optimism. At least failure feels familiar. That is when darkness becomes dangerous. Not when someone cries loudly. Not when someone posts sad quotes online. The dangerous moment is actually quieter than people imagine. It happens when somebody becomes emotionally calm about giving up. When the chaos disappears and gets replaced by numb acceptance. That cold internal sentence. I genuinely don't know how much longer I can keep restarting my life. And maybe the cruelest part of all this is that the outside world keeps moving normally while your internal world collapses. Bills still exist. Responsibilities still exist. Social expectations still exist. People still expect productivity from a person whose mind feels like it survived a natural disaster. So you learn to split yourself in half. One version for the public. One version for the darkness. The public version says, "I'm fine." The real version sits awake at night wondering if everybody else was secretly given instructions on how to survive life while you somehow missed the tutorial entirely. Chapter 2. When death starts feeling logical. Nobody tells you how terrifying it is when your fear of death starts disappearing. Because most people imagine suicidal thoughts as dramatic crying, screaming, public breakdowns, or somebody standing on the edge of a bridge in the rain like a movie scene. But honestly, sometimes it's quieter than that. Sometimes it's just you sitting in traffic thinking, if everything stopped right now, I don't even think I'd fight it anymore. That's what makes depression dangerous. Not sadness, not tears, acceptance. The cold, exhausted acceptance that life keeps hurting in the exact same places no matter how hard you try to become better. And that's the part nobody understands about relapse. Relapse does not just destroy progress. It destroys trust in yourself. Every time you fall back into the same darkness, your brain starts collecting evidence against your own future. One relapse becomes 2. 2 becomes 10. Suddenly, your entire life starts feeling like a loop designed specifically to embarrass you emotionally. You try. God, you try. You try routines. You try discipline. You try praying harder. Sleeping earlier. Eating healthier. Journaling. Therapy. Gym motivation. Positive thinking. New mindset. New era. Healing journey. You delete the apps. You block the numbers. You disappear for a while trying to rebuild yourself quietly. And then one bad week happens. One lonely night. One emotional trigger. One overwhelming thought. And boom. You're back in the same hole staring at the same ceiling asking the same terrifying question. How many times can a person restart before they completely break? That question eats people alive. Because eventually depression stops feeling like an illness and starts feeling like identity. You stop saying, "I'm struggling." You start saying, "This is just who I am." Broken becomes familiar. Self-destruction becomes predictable. Chaos becomes home. And once hopelessness becomes familiar, death starts sounding less shocking. Not exciting. Not glamorous. Logical. That's the scary word. Logical. Like your brain slowly begins building a courtroom case against your existence. Every failure becomes evidence. Every relapse becomes another witness testifying that maybe you were never meant to get better in the first place. Your mistakes replay in HD quality while your achievements disappear like corrupted files. And the worst part? People accidentally reinforce it. You can see it in their faces sometimes. The disappointment, the exhaustion, the cautious distance, the subtle way people stop fully believing your promises because they've watched you collapse too many times already. Nobody says it directly, but you start feeling it anyway. Here we go again. That sentence destroys people, especially the ones genuinely trying. Because there's nothing more emotionally violent than fighting your own mind every day, while the outside world quietly assumes your failure is inevitable. You become trapped between two hells, the version of yourself you hate and the version nobody believes you can become. That pressure suffocates people slowly. You begin mourning future versions of yourself before they even exist. Careers die before they begin. Relationships collapse before they fully grow. Dreams start feeling cringe to imagine because disappointment has become your most stable relationship. And eventually, your mind starts asking questions you never thought you'd ask. What if this never changes? What if I'm exhausting everybody around me? What if I'm the problem? What if they'd all heal faster without me? That last question is dangerous. Because depression is manipulative in the most terrifying way possible. It convinces hurting people that their disappearance would be an act of kindness. It reframes death as relief not only for you, but for everybody forced to carry your emotional weight. That is why some people stop talking before they stop existing. Not because they don't care, because they think everybody else will be happier if they vanish quietly. And honestly, repeated relapse makes those thoughts louder, especially when progress keeps collapsing publicly. Nothing humiliates a human being more than becoming hopeful again just to emotionally crash in front of everybody. You tell people you're doing better. They celebrate you. Maybe you even start believing it yourself. Then suddenly the darkness returns stronger than before, and now you're not only depressed, you're embarrassed too. That combination is lethal. Depression plus shame. Because now you don't even want help anymore. You want invisibility. You stop answering calls. Messages feel exhausting. Social interaction starts feeling performative. Even kindness becomes uncomfortable because deep down you feel like a fraudulent person wasting everybody's hope. And the truly horrifying thing, life keeps moving normally while your internal world burns down. People still laugh. Bills still arrive. Couples still fall in love. Social media still floods your screen with success stories while you sit there mentally buffering like a broken machine, pretending you're not one bad night away from completely giving up. That's when death starts feeling logical to emotionally exhausted people. Not because they hate life, because they can no longer imagine surviving it long term. And maybe the saddest part of all this is that many people don't actually want their life to end. They just desperately want the pain to stop long enough to breathe again. Chapter 3. Nobody thinks you'll change anyway. There's a specific kind of pain that comes from realizing people are no longer disappointed in you. They're prepared for you. That's when it gets bad. Because disappointment still contains hope. Disappointment means somebody expected better from you. But preparation means your failure has become predictable. Normal. Scheduled emotionally like a calendar notification everybody silently accepted years ago. And honestly, that realization destroys people slowly. You notice it in tiny moments first. The hesitation in someone's voice when you say you're doing better. The fake smile when you mention your new plans. The cautious tone people use around you like they're handling unstable explosives instead of human being trying desperately not to fall apart again. Nobody says it directly, but you feel it. They always relapse. They always ruin things eventually. They never change. That sentence follows damaged people everywhere, especially people with history. History is brutal because it turns your worst moments into permanent evidence against your future. Every mistake becomes archived. Every breakdown becomes part of your identity. Every relapse becomes another reason for people to emotionally distance themselves from your potential. And eventually you start agreeing with them. That's the dangerous part. Not when others lose faith in you. When you lose faith in yourself because of how everybody looks at you. You begin monitoring your own behavior constantly. Every emotion feels suspicious. Every bad day feels like the beginning of another collapse. You become terrified of yourself, terrified of your impulses, terrified of your sadness, terrified that one emotional crack might reopen the entire darkness you fought so hard to escape. Living like that is exhausting. You stop feeling human. You start feeling like a recovery project nobody fully expects to succeed. And the loneliness that comes with that kind of existence is unbelievable. Because technically people are still around you. Family exists. Friends exist. Co-workers exist. But emotionally, you feel isolated inside your own reputation. You feel trapped inside old versions of yourself that refuse to die publicly. That's why many hurting people disappear socially. Not because they hate people. Because being perceived becomes painful. You walk into rooms already feeling judged before anyone even speaks. You overanalyze facial expressions, tone changes, delayed replies. Every interaction starts feeling like invisible confirmation that nobody fully trusts the new you. And honestly, sometimes they don't. Because repeated pain changes people around you too. That truth hurts, but it's real. People get tired. Families get exhausted. Friends become cautious. Trust weakens after enough damage. And while emotionally struggling people are fighting their internal battles, the people around them are often fighting emotional fatigue too. That creates a horrifying cycle. You try harder to prove you've changed. The pressure makes you anxious. The anxiety makes you unstable. The instability creates mistakes. The mistakes confirm everybody's fears. Then shame drags you right back into self-destruction again. It feels rigged emotionally, like trying to outrun a shadow attached to your own body. And eventually you stop introducing people to your hopeful side entirely. Dreams become embarrassing. Goals become private. Optimism starts feeling childish. Because deep down you already expect humiliation before success even begins. You become emotionally allergic to hope because hope creates vulnerability, and vulnerability hurts more when your life has taught you disappointment is the most reliable outcome. That's when depression becomes identity instead of emotion. You stop saying, "I made mistakes," and start saying, "I am the mistake." That sentence ruins lives. Because once somebody internalizes failure as personality instead of circumstance, self-destruction becomes easier to justify. Why fight for a future you secretly believe you'll ruin anyway? Why build relationships you think you'll eventually damage? Why dream big when your own history keeps replaying like a horror trailer inside your head? People underestimate how psychologically violent shame can become over time, especially public shame. Especially repeated failure. Especially when everyone around you already expects collapse before growth even fully starts. And then comes the worst feeling of all. Watching people become surprised by your good behavior. That hurts more than insults sometimes. Because it reminds you how low their expectations became. You stay consistent for a few weeks and suddenly everybody acts shocked. You remain calm during conflict and people treat it like a historical event. You handle responsibility properly, and people respond with suspicious praise like they're waiting for the real you to return eventually. That destroys confidence quietly. Because no matter how hard you try, your past enters the room before you do. And maybe that's why some people eventually stop trying entirely. Not because change is impossible. Because carrying the emotional weight of proving your humanity every single day becomes unbearable. You get tired of auditioning for forgiveness. Tired of defending your growth. Tired of feeling like your future is permanently chained to your worst moments. So eventually your mind starts whispering dangerous things again. If nobody believes in me anyway, what's the point? And depression loves that question. Because hopelessness grows fastest inside isolation. Especially when the person suffering begins feeling emotionally disposable. That's why some people stop talking before they completely collapse. Not because they don't care. Not because they want attention. But because somewhere deep down they genuinely started believing the world already decided who they are. And they're terrified everybody might be right. Chapter 4. One mistake deletes 3 years of progress. Nobody warns you that recovery feels unfair. Not difficult. Unfair. Because when you're trying to rebuild your life, you slowly realize something terrifying. People remember your failures longer than your growth. One bad decision can erase years of progress in the eyes of everybody watching you. 3 years of healing destroyed by one relapse. One emotional breakdown. One drunken night. One impulsive mistake. One moment where pain became louder than discipline. And suddenly everybody looks at you differently again. That feeling ruins people internally, especially when they were genuinely trying. Because there's nothing more emotionally crushing than clawing your way out of darkness for years only to watch one mistake drag your entire identity back into the graveyard your past came from. It feels like life keeps screenshots of your worst moments but deletes evidence of your recovery automatically. That's why some people stop believing in redemption. Not because healing is impossible. Because failure is louder. People celebrate improvement quietly, but they discuss collapse like breaking news. Nobody posts, I stayed emotionally stable for 6 months. But one public mistake, one visible breakdown, suddenly everybody becomes an expert on your character again. Your progress disappears under the weight of one ugly moment. And honestly, that pressure becomes psychologically exhausting. You begin living terrified of mistakes instead of excited about growth. That changes everything. You monitor yourself constantly. Every emotion feels dangerous. Every bad day feels like the possible beginning of another disaster. You stop trusting your own mind because history keeps proving how quickly one emotional spiral can ruin everything you built. And the scary part is, sometimes people around you reinforce it without realizing. You can hear it in the language they use. Don't mess this up. This is your last chance. You better not ruin things again. That kind of pressure suffocates healing. Because now recovery no longer feels like becoming healthy. It feels like surviving public execution emotionally. Every step forward comes with invisible anxiety attached to it. You stop experiencing peace because deep down, you know one mistake could reactivate everybody's disappointment instantly. And depression loves that fear. Because fear creates tension. Tension creates emotional exhaustion. Emotional exhaustion creates relapse. Then relapse creates shame. And shame drags you right back into self-destruction again. The cycle feels demonic sometimes, especially when time itself starts feeling against you. That's another part nobody discusses enough. The older you get, the heavier mistakes become emotionally. At 20, people say you're figuring life out. At 30, they start calling you irresponsible. At 40, they call you damaged. Society gives struggling people expiration dates emotionally, and once you feel like your time is running out, panic enters the healing process. You start comparing your life to everybody else's timelines. Friends building families, people buying homes, careers growing, lives stabilizing. Meanwhile, you're sitting there trying not to mentally collapse over things most people learned to manage years ago. That comparison poisons the mind slowly. You begin feeling delayed as a human being, like life moved on without you while you were busy fighting invisible wars inside your own head. That feeling creates desperation, and desperation makes people unstable. You start rushing healing because you feel behind, rushing relationships because you feel lonely, rushing success because you feel ashamed. But rushed healing is fragile healing. So eventually pressure cracks the foundation again, and suddenly you're back at the beginning staring at the ruins wondering how one mistake managed to destroy everything so quickly. Again. That word becomes torture. Again. Another apology. Another restart. Another humiliating conversation explaining why you failed after promising everyone things would be different this time. That embarrassment changes people. You stop celebrating progress because you become scared of jinxing it emotionally. Happiness starts feeling temporary. Stability feels suspicious. Even good moments become stressful because part of your brain keeps whispering, "This won't last." And honestly, after enough collapse, it becomes hard arguing against that voice, especially when your past keeps ambushing your future repeatedly. You could improve genuinely for years and still lose opportunities because of who you used to be. That reality breaks people quietly. Employers remember. Families remember. Partners remember. Friends remember. Meanwhile, you're trying desperately to become somebody new while carrying old versions of yourself chained to your ankles permanently. That weight creates hopelessness. Not dramatic hopelessness. Quiet hopelessness. The kind where you stop imagining a future naturally because disappointment has become more believable than success. You stop dreaming loudly because life trained you to expect emotional humiliation eventually. And maybe that's why some people begin feeling emotionally numb towards self-destruction. Because after enough restarting, collapse stops feeling shocking. It starts feeling inevitable. That's the dangerous mental shift. When failure no longer feels accidental, it feels destined. And once somebody begins believing they are destined to ruin everything good in their life, depression gains terrifying power over their identity. Because now every mistake doesn't just feel like behavior. It feels like proof. Proof that everybody warning you about yourself might have been right all along. Chapter 5. Maybe they were right about me. There comes a moment in some people's lives where the fight changes completely. At first, you're fighting depression. Then you're fighting addiction. Then you're fighting failure. But eventually, you start fighting the terrifying possibility that everybody warning you about yourself might have been correct all along. That thought destroys people internally. Because once self-hatred stops sounding emotional and starts sounding factual, the darkness becomes harder to escape. You stop arguing against your destructive thoughts because they begin feeling supported by evidence. Failed relationships, broken trust, relapse, lost opportunities, emotional instability, regret stacked on top of regret until your entire identity starts feeling like a crime scene. And honestly, shame changes how reality feels. Food tastes different. Music feels distant. Conversations feel fake. Compliments bounce off you like bullets hitting concrete because deep down you already decided you are not redeemable enough to believe anything good about yourself anymore. That's why some people become numb to ruining their own lives. Because internally they already think they deserve collapse. That sentence sounds dramatic until you live it. You begin sabotaging things automatically. Healthy relationships feel suspicious. Stability feels temporary. Happiness creates anxiety because part of your brain keeps waiting for destruction anyway. So sometimes you destroy good things before life gets the chance to take them away from you first. Depression loves that mindset because self-hatred creates permission. Permission to stop trying. Permission to disappear emotionally. Permission to self-destruct quietly while pretending you're just going through something. And the scary thing is, people around you often accidentally strengthen it. Not intentionally, but words stick. You never learn. You always ruin everything. You'll never change. You're exactly the same. Those sentences echo and damage minds for years, especially late at night when silence gets loud enough for memory to become torture. People think insults disappear after conversations end, but emotionally broken people replay those words like cursed audio recordings inside their head long after everybody else moved on. That's how hopeless identities form. Slowly, repeatedly, like emotional graffiti sprayed over your self-worth until eventually you can no longer remember who you were before shame became your personality. And once somebody fully identifies as broken, dangerous things start happening mentally. You stop seeing mistakes as behavior. You see them as destiny. That shift is horrifying, because now every failure becomes confirmation instead of warning. Every relapse becomes proof. Every bad decision becomes another brick added to the internal prison you built around your own future. Eventually, you stop imagining success naturally because your mind has become emotionally conditioned to expect disappointment first. That conditioning destroys motivation. Why work hard if you secretly believe you'll ruin it anyway? Why open your heart if you think you'll hurt people eventually? Why dream big if your own brain constantly whispers, "You know how this ends"? That voice becomes exhausting, especially because depression is manipulative in such a believable way. It takes your worst moments and replays them without context, without growth, without nuance. Your mind becomes a prosecutor presenting only evidence of failure while hiding every moment you survived, improved, or genuinely tried. And after enough emotional punishment, some people stop defending themselves internally. That's when darkness becomes terrifying. Not when somebody cries loudly. When they emotionally surrender quietly. You stop correcting people when they misunderstand you. Stop explaining your pain. Stop defending your intentions. Stop talking about your dreams because deep down you already feel emotionally convicted by your own past. The world starts feeling like a courtroom where everybody already decided the verdict before you even entered the building. Guilty, broken, hopeless. And maybe the cruelest part of all this is how isolated it makes people feel. Because even when surrounded by others, shame creates invisible distance emotionally. You laugh with people while secretly believing they would leave instantly if they fully understood how damaged your mind actually feels. That loneliness changes people. You become quieter, more detached, less expressive. Not because you stopped caring, because you stopped believing you deserved understanding. And honestly, repeated failure can make self-hatred addictive in a strange way. You become so used to criticizing yourself that kindness starts feeling uncomfortable. Compassion feels suspicious. Forgiveness feels fake. Pain becomes familiar enough that suffering almost starts feeling safer than healing. That's the trap. Because once pain becomes identity, recovery feels like losing yourself. Even toxic versions of ourselves become emotionally comforting after enough time. Chaos becomes routine. Self-destruction becomes predictable. Misery becomes familiar enough to feel strangely stable. That's why some people relapse, not because they enjoy pain, but because unfamiliar peace terrifies them psychologically. And then one day you catch yourself thinking the sentence that scares people the most. Maybe they were right about me. The thought has buried countless human beings emotionally. Because once somebody genuinely believes they are beyond repair, life itself starts feeling less meaningful. The future shrinks. Hope weakens. Survival becomes mechanical instead of emotional. You stop living forward and start existing day to day like a person waiting for something inside them to finally collapse permanently. But the terrifying thing about depression is that it can make lies feel wiser than truth. And one of its biggest lies is convincing damaged people that their worst chapter was the entire story. Chapter 6. Relapse is a different kind of hell. The first time you fail, people comfort you. The second time, they encourage you. But after the 5th relapse, the 10th collapse, the 20th promise you could not keep, everything changes. The room changes. The tone changes. People stop sounding hopeful and start sounding tired. And honestly, so do you. That's what makes relapse such a brutal kind of pain. It's not just the mistake itself. It's the emotional whiplash of believing you escaped darkness, only to wake up and realize it followed you home again like a curse that memorized your address. Relapse feels personal. That's why it destroys people differently. Because every time you fall back into old behavior, it feels like betrayal coming from inside your own body. Your own mind becomes the thing you stop trusting most. You begin questioning every good moment, every improvement, every ounce of confidence because deep down you're terrified none of it was real. What if I never changed? That question ruins people, especially after progress existed. Because relapse after hope hurts worse than failure without it. If you've always been drowning, pain feels normal. But when you finally touch air for a while, when life briefly starts feeling manageable again, falling back into darkness feels catastrophic emotionally. It feels like losing a future you already started grieving into existence. And the shame? The shame is unbelievable. You start hiding the relapse immediately. You become quieter, more distant, more exhausted emotionally. Messages go unanswered because explaining another collapse feels humiliating. You rehearse fake versions of yourself for public interaction while privately feeling your life crack apart again behind the scenes. And honestly, people can sense it sometimes. That's the terrifying part. They notice the energy shift, the silence, the emotional disappearance, the slight emptiness returning to your eyes. Even if they don't mention it directly, you can feel them wondering, did they relapse again? That sentence alone can trigger self-hatred hard enough to restart the entire downward spiral. Because relapse is not just behavior, it's identity panic. You start replaying every past failure instantly. Every old version of yourself comes crawling back mentally at once. The addicted version, the depressed version, the unstable version, the emotionally reckless version. Suddenly, it feels like none of those people ever left. They were just waiting quietly for one weak moment to reclaim your life again. That thought suffocates people, especially the ones genuinely trying. Because outsiders often misunderstand relapse completely. They think relapse means somebody didn't care enough. But many times the person relapsing cared too much. They became emotionally exhausted from fighting themselves nonstop every single day. Recovery becomes difficult when your mind turns survival into a full-time war zone internally. People underestimate how tiring self-control becomes after years of psychological battle. Imagine fighting urges, sadness, memories, loneliness, anxiety, shame, overthinking, temptation, regret, and self-hatred simultaneously every single day while still trying to function like a normal human being publicly. Eventually, emotional fatigue starts eating holes in discipline itself. That's why relapse often happens during exhaustion. Not excitement. Exhaustion. One bad night. One lonely weekend. One emotional trigger. One moment where your brain whispers, "You're tired." stop fighting. And sometimes people listen, not because they want destruction, because they desperately want relief. That's the tragedy nobody talks about enough. Many destructive behaviors begin as emotional anesthesia. Alcohol, drugs, toxic relationships, doom scrolling, isolation, self-sabotage. Numbing behaviors become attractive when your mind feels unbearably loud every hour of the day. You don't even chase pleasure anymore. You chase silence, temporary silence. But temporary silence creates permanent consequences. That's why relapse feels so evil psychologically. The comfort lasts minutes. The shame lasts months, sometimes years. And once the emotional crash arrives afterward, depression attacks even harder than before, because now hopelessness has fresh evidence against you again. You see, your brain says, you were never changing. That voice becomes vicious after relapse, especially because life rarely pauses to let emotionally broken people recover properly. Bills still exist. Responsibilities still exist. Society still expects performance from people mentally fighting themselves every waking moment. So instead of healing fully, many people just learn how to hide collapse more efficiently. That's dangerous, because hidden relapse creates hidden hopelessness, and hidden hopelessness can become deadly quietly. You stop asking for help because you're embarrassed. You stop opening up because you're tired of disappointing people. You stop believing recovery is possible because every relapse feels like another nail sealing the coffin of the future you once imagined for yourself. And maybe the cruelest part, some relapses happen after the person was finally starting to love themselves again. That's why they hit so hard emotionally. Because now you're not only grieving the mistake, you're grieving the version of yourself you thought was finally escaping the darkness permanently. But relapse tells a terrifying lie. It tells people that falling backward erased all forward movement. And depression loves convincing hurting people that one collapse means total failure. When in reality, some people survive by learning how to keep going even after breaking repeatedly. Chapter 7. My mind became a dangerous place. At some point, the real danger stopped being the outside world. It became your own thoughts. That's the terrifying thing nobody explains properly about depression. Eventually, the battlefield moves inward. The enemy starts sounding like your own voice. And once your mind becomes a place you no longer feel safe inside, life changes in ways most people around you will never fully understand. Because now there's nowhere to escape. Not even sleep helps anymore. You wake up exhausted because your brain never truly shuts off. Thoughts keep moving like broken machinery, grinding itself apart at 3 a.m. Regret, fear, embarrassment, overthinking, worst-case scenarios. Cringe memories from 6 years ago, suddenly replaying like they happened 10 minutes earlier. And somehow every thought sounds convincing. That's the dangerous part. Depression doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers logically. You ruined your life. You'll relapse again. People are pretending to care. You exhaust everybody. You're too damaged to fix. The scariest thoughts are the ones that sound reasonable. Because eventually you stop questioning them. You start building your entire identity around them. And honestly, constant overthinking changes people physically. Your body starts reacting to thoughts like they're real emergencies. Heart racing, stomach tight, chest heavy, exhaustion everywhere. You begin living in permanent emotional survival mode while everyone around you thinks you're just stressed. Stressed? No. Your mind became a haunted house you're trapped inside 24 hours a day. That's different. Because normal stress leaves eventually. These days, you could be sitting in silence and still feel mentally attacked from the inside. One random memory triggers another. One bad thought creates 10 more. Suddenly, you're mentally spiraling over your entire existence while everybody else is casually grocery shopping or posting vacation photos online. That disconnect feels isolating. The world keeps moving normally while your brain turns against you in real time. And maybe the worst part is how invisible it all looks publicly. People see you sitting quietly and assume you're relaxed. Meanwhile, internally, you're replaying every mistake you've ever made while simultaneously imagining 20 future disasters that haven't even happened yet. Your nervous system becomes addicted to danger emotionally. Peace starts feeling unfamiliar. Silence becomes threatening because silence gives your thoughts room to speak louder. That's why some people stay constantly distracted. Music always playing. Videos always running. Phone always in hand. Not because they're lazy, because silence became psychologically unsafe. And over time, you begin noticing something terrifying. Your own thoughts start sounding crueler than actual enemies. That realization hurts differently, especially because mentally exhausted people often become experts at hiding it. You learn how to smile during emotional collapse, laugh during panic, function during hopelessness. You master fake normality because society rewards appearance more than honesty. So eventually people stop checking on you because externally you still look operational. But internally, you're drowning, quietly. And the isolation created by that experience changes people deeply. You stop explaining yourself because nobody fully understands anyway. You stop talking about your mental battles because every conversation starts sounding repetitive. You begin feeling emotionally trapped between wanting help and not wanting to burden anybody else with the darkness inside your head. That loneliness becomes dangerous because isolated thoughts grow louder, especially self-hatred. Depression turns self-awareness into self-torture sometimes. You become hyper-aware of your flaws. Every awkward interaction feels catastrophic. Every mistake feels humiliating. Every rejection feels personal. Your brain starts collecting negative evidence automatically while ignoring anything positive completely. It becomes impossible to relax inside yourself. That's when people start emotionally disappearing. Not physically first, emotionally. You respond slower, talk less, feel disconnected during conversations. Even around people you love, something feels distant, like there's invisible glass separating you from everybody else emotionally. You watch life happening instead of participating in it fully. And honestly, that emptiness scares people privately. Because eventually, you realize that darkness is no longer reacting to life circumstances anymore. Even on good days, your mind still feels dangerous. Even when nothing bad happens, sadness still appears randomly. You start questioning whether peace is even possible for someone whose thoughts became this destructive internally. That question keeps people awake at night, especially after enough relapse, shame, and disappointment. Because once somebody loses trust in their own mind, reality itself starts feeling unstable. You no longer know whether your thoughts are truthful or just emotionally distorted. But depression makes distorted thinking feel intelligent. That's why mentally struggling people often isolate themselves silently, not because they hate people, but because they're terrified of becoming emotionally toxic to everyone around them. And maybe the darkest part of all this is how normal it starts feeling after a while. You adapt to psychological chaos. Self-hatred becomes background noise. Overthinking becomes routine. Hopelessness becomes familiar. That's when the mind becomes truly dangerous. Not when it breaks loudly. When it breaks quietly enough for you to start calling the damage normal. Chapter 8. The night I almost ended everything. Nobody plans for the exact night it happens. That's what scares people afterward. Because they imagine suicidal moments as carefully organized decisions with dramatic speeches and final letters written under dim lighting like movies. But honestly, sometimes it's just emotional exhaustion finally reaching critical mass at 2:13 a.m. while the rest of the world sleeps peacefully. Sometimes it's random. One more disappointment. One more relapse. One more argument. One more lonely night where your thoughts become louder than your survival instinct. And suddenly something inside you snaps quietly. That's the dangerous kind of breaking. Quiet breaking. Because externally nothing even looks different at first. The room is still the same. The ceiling still exists. Cars still move outside. Your phone still glows beside you with notifications from people who have absolutely no idea your mind is currently standing at the edge of something irreversible. And honestly, that's what makes emotional rock bottom terrifying. How ordinary it looks from the outside. You sit there replaying your entire life like a courtroom montage. Every failure, every embarrassment, every person you disappointed, every dream that died halfway through becoming real. Depression edits memory like a horror film director. Suddenly, your entire existence starts looking like evidence against your own survival. And the scariest part, your brain starts sounding calm, not emotional. Calm. That calmness terrifies survivors later because it feels less like panic and more like surrender. Like your mind finally got too tired to continue arguing for your existence anymore. The chaos disappears and gets replaced by a cold, exhausted silence. People misunderstand that silence. They think danger looks dramatic. Sometimes danger looks emotionally peaceful, like somebody finally deciding, I genuinely cannot do this anymore. That sentence has ended countless lives quietly, especially after years of fighting invisible battles nobody fully saw. Because eventually exhaustion becomes stronger than fear. You stop worrying about death and start worrying about waking up tomorrow feeling the exact same pain all over again. That's when the darkness becomes convincing. It starts reframing disappearance as mercy, not only for you, for everybody. Your brain begins whispering horrifying things. They'd recover eventually. You only create stress. You ruin every good thing. You're exhausting everybody. That voice sounds intelligent during emotional collapse. Logical. Rational. Like your mind slowly builds a fake mathematical equation proving your absence would improve the lives of people around you. That lie kills people. Because depression weaponizes guilt. And guilty people often believe they deserve punishment instead of help. So you isolate harder. You stop texting back. Stop opening up. Stop explaining. Not because you stopped caring, because deep down you became convinced your pain was becoming contagious to everyone close to you. You start feeling emotionally radioactive. Dangerous to love. Difficult to save. Heavy to carry. That loneliness intensifies everything. Especially at night. Nighttime is different for mentally struggling people. Daylight distracts. People exist. Noise exists. Responsibilities force temporary movement. But nighttime removes distractions. Suddenly, it's just you alone with every thought you spent the entire day trying to outrun unsuccessfully. That's when memories attack harder. Regret gets louder. Shame becomes physical. And honestly, some nights feel endless psychologically. Minutes stretch like hours. The silence inside the room becomes unbearable because your thoughts start echoing violently against it. You begin feeling trapped inside your own existence like a person emotionally locked in a burning building with no visible exits. And maybe the worst part, you genuinely believe nobody fully understands. Not because nobody cares. Because depression isolates perception itself. You start thinking, if people truly knew how broken my mind became, they'd leave too. That belief keeps countless hurting people silent right before collapse. But strangely enough, sometimes survival comes from the smallest things imaginable. Not motivational speeches. Not magical breakthroughs. Tiny things. A message arriving unexpectedly. A memory of somebody's laugh. A parent's face. A pet waiting at home. A random sunrise. A younger version of yourself you suddenly remember didn't deserve this much pain. Sometimes people survive not because life suddenly becomes beautiful, but because something interrupts the darkness long enough for the emotional storm to pass temporarily. That's important. Because suicidal moments are often waves. Intense. Overwhelming. Convincing. But still waves. And waves eventually move. That realization saves lives. Not instantly. Not perfectly. But enough. Enough for one more hour. One more night. One more sunrise. And honestly, many survivors later admit something terrifying. They didn't actually want death itself. They wanted the pain to stop immediately. That's different. Depression hides that difference during emotional collapse. It makes permanent decisions feel like the only solution to temporary emotional hurricanes. But emotions, even unbearable ones, can shift in ways impossible to imagine during the darkest nights. And maybe that's why surviving rock bottom changes people permanently. Because once you've stared directly into the possibility of ending everything and somehow remained alive afterward, you begin understanding pain differently. You stop romanticizing suffering. Stop pretending mental battles are mindset problems. You realize survival itself can become a full-time achievement invisible to everyone except the person fighting to stay alive internally. And maybe the strangest part of all this? Sometimes the people smiling the hardest are the ones who barely survived themselves the night before. Chapter 9. Nobody talks about living after ruining your life. Nobody prepares you for what happens after the collapse. Not during it. After it. Because movies end when the broken person survives. Credits roll after the emotional speech. Music plays. Everybody hugs. Redemption looks cinematic. But real life keeps going after the breakdown. Bills still exist. People still remember. Your past still follows you into rooms before you even enter them physically. And honestly, that part hurts differently. Because surviving rock bottom does not magically erase the damage. Some relationships stay broken. Some opportunities never return. Some people never fully trust you again. Recovery doesn't rewind destruction. It teaches you how to live with the ruins without becoming buried underneath them permanently. That realization crushes people at first, especially the ones secretly hoping healing would erase shame completely. But shame has memory. That's why many survivors struggle emotionally after they're technically doing better. You finally escape the worst part of depression, addiction, self-destruction, or emotional collapse, and suddenly you're left alone with the consequences staring back at you in daylight. That silence becomes heavy. You start replaying old versions of yourself constantly. The people you hurt, the opportunities you wasted, the years lost to survival mode. Sometimes the grief hits randomly while doing normal things like grocery shopping or hearing an old song unexpectedly. You realize parts of your life disappeared while you were busy trying not to die internally. That thought breaks people, quietly. Especially because society loves comeback stories, but rarely understands recovery itself. People celebrate transformation but become uncomfortable around the slow, awkward process of rebuilding. They want healed versions of you quickly. Functional versions. Productive versions. But internally you still feel fragile some days. That fragility becomes embarrassing. You laugh in conversations while secretly fighting memories. Smile during dinners while your chest still carries old panic. Function publicly while privately wondering whether you truly deserve the second chance life somehow gave you. And maybe the hardest part, learning how to exist without constantly punishing yourself. Because after enough failure, guilt becomes automatic. You wake up already feeling behind emotionally. Every good moment feels borrowed. Happiness starts feeling suspicious, like life accidentally gave it to the wrong person. You begin waiting for collapse, even during peaceful moments, because chaos became your emotional normal years ago. That's what trauma does sometimes. It teaches people to fear stability. You become uncomfortable when life gets calm because your nervous system spent too many years preparing for disaster. Peace feels fake. Silence feels dangerous. Love feels temporary. Your mind keeps scanning for warning signs even when nothing bad is happening. That exhaustion follows survivors everywhere, especially the ones rebuilding quietly. Because rebuilding your life after destroying parts of it is one of the loneliest experiences imaginable. People see progress externally, but do not see the emotional labor required just to remain stable internally every day. They do not see how much strength it takes to wake up and continue living while carrying memories you wish you could delete permanently. And honestly, some days still hurt. That's another truth nobody says enough. Healing is not linear. Some mornings you feel strong. Other mornings, one random memory emotionally punches you back into older versions of yourself unexpectedly. Recovery is messy, non-linear, humiliating sometimes. There are days you genuinely feel proud of surviving, and days you still feel haunted by who you used to be. But surviving after self-destruction changes your perspective permanently. You begin understanding pain differently. You stop judging struggling people so quickly. Stop mocking weakness. Stop assuming everybody smiling is mentally okay. Because once you've personally experienced what it feels like to mentally collapse while the world keeps moving normally around you, compassion becomes automatic. That's one strange gift suffering gives some people. Softness. Not immediately. At first, pain makes you bitter, angry, detached. But eventually, surviving yourself teaches you something terrifying and beautiful at the same time. Human beings are far more fragile than they pretend publicly. Everybody is carrying invisible battles. Some just hide them better than others. And maybe that realization is what slowly helps survivors reconnect with life again. Not fake positivity, not motivational nonsense. Honesty. The honest understanding that being broken does not automatically make somebody worthless. That relapse does not erase every moment of progress. That surviving emotional collapse itself is evidence of strength, even when society cannot visibly measure it. Because honestly, many people walking around normally today are secretly survivors of nights they never thought they'd emotionally escape. And maybe the most important thing recovery teaches is this. Your worst chapter may explain you, but it does not have to permanently define you. Even after destruction, even after relapse, even after shame, even after becoming somebody you barely recognized during your darkest years, life can still continue. Messily, slowly, imperfectly, but continue anyway. Chapter 10. The version of you that survives this. One day, if you survive long enough, you'll meet a version of yourself you do not recognize immediately. Not because they became perfect, because they became tired of hating themselves. That transformation happens slowly, painfully slowly. There's no movie montage for it. No dramatic soundtrack playing while life magically fixes itself overnight. Real healing looks uglier than people expect. It's crying in parked cars, taking walks to calm panic attacks, learning how to sleep without your thoughts attacking you at 2 a.m., sitting alone trying to convince yourself that surviving another day still matters even when your brain disagrees violently. And honestly, some days you still lose that argument temporarily. That's normal. Because healing is not becoming emotionally invincible. Healing is learning how to continue existing without letting every dark thought become a death sentence. That difference matters more than people realize, especially after years of self-destruction. Because once somebody spends enough time believing they are broken beyond repair, survival itself starts feeling suspicious. You begin questioning happiness when it appears, questioning love, questioning peace. Part of your brain keeps waiting for disaster because disaster became emotionally familiar for too long. But eventually something strange starts happening. You stop wanting to disappear all the time. Not dramatically, quietly. You notice small things again. Sunlight through windows. Music sounding alive again. Food tasting normal. Laughing without forcing it. Moments where your chest no longer feels constantly heavy. Those tiny moments feel unbelievable after depression because you forgot human beings were capable of feeling calm naturally. Survival mode became your permanent emotional address for so long that peace feels almost illegal at first. And honestly, that first glimpse of peace scares many survivors. Because now you have something to lose again. Hope. Hope terrifies people who spent years emotionally drowning. Because hope creates vulnerability. Hope means imagining a future again. And imagining a future becomes difficult when your past spent years convincing you that collapse was inevitable. But healing slowly teaches something important. Your thoughts are not always prophecy. That realization changes lives, especially for people whose minds became dangerous places for too long. You start learning how to observe thoughts instead of obeying them automatically. The voice saying you ruin everything becomes quieter eventually. Not completely gone, quieter. And for survivors, quieter thoughts feel like miracles sometimes. That's another thing nobody explains properly. Healing is often subtle, not cinematic. You don't wake up transformed one morning. You just slowly stop wanting to die every single day. That's huge, even if nobody claps for it publicly. And maybe the most emotional part of recovery is realizing how long you spent fighting yourself instead of living. You look back at old versions of yourself with grief sometimes. The exhausted version, the hopeless version, the version secretly begging for the pain to stop while pretending to function publicly. And honestly, you stop hating that version eventually. That's real healing, not pretending the darkness never happened. Forgiving yourself for surviving it imperfectly. Because survival is messy. Some people survive through relapse. Some survive through breakdowns. Some survive through isolation. Some survive by barely hanging on emotionally for years until life finally softens enough for them to breathe properly again. There is no clean survival story. And maybe that truth matters, especially for the people still carrying shame about how broken they became during their darkest seasons. Because depression loves convincing people they failed at healing simply because they struggled while trying to survive unbearable pain. But struggling does not erase strength. Relapsing does not erase growth. Breaking down does not erase humanity. Sometimes survival itself is proof of unbelievable resilience, invisible to everybody except the person carrying it internally. And honestly, many survivors eventually become the exact kind of person they once desperately needed during their worst nights. Gentler, more compassionate, less judgmental, more emotionally honest. Pain changes people, but surviving pain changes them differently. You stop laughing at mental health struggles. Stop assuming everybody has equal emotional strength. Stop treating suffering like weakness. Because once your own mind nearly destroyed you, you begin understanding how fragile human beings truly are beneath the performance everybody gives the world publicly. That understanding creates softness. And softness after suffering is one of the strongest things a person can become. Because bitter people are predictable. Soft survivors are revolutionary, especially in a world teaching everybody to hide pain until they collapse privately. And maybe that's the final truth this audiobook leaves behind. The version of you that survives this may still carry scars, still have bad nights, still feel fragile sometimes. But fragile is not the same thing as hopeless. That difference saves lives. Because even after depression, even after relapse, even after shame, even after becoming emotionally lost inside your own mind, a future version of you can still exist that feels grateful you stayed alive long enough to meet them.